Sometimes the trail is long, it seems we can't go on, even though we know the sun is just beyond the rise. But when we greet the day, as our grandparents say, light will always show the way to those with open eyes. And you may wonder why they had to die, but our old ones will be here with us as long as earth abides. Look to your mother's face, and you may find a trace of hope that can replace the sorrow of disguise. All things that love are strong, winds carry us along. As breath turns into song, the heart can recognize. You may wonder why they had to die, but our old ones will be here with us as long as earth abides. It's like
Good morning,
we're
Devin.
lost in space, where we can't find a place. Each day is an endless race, and no one wins the prize. But if we just slow down, take time to look around, the lost may still be found as night becomes sunrise. You may wonder why they had to die, but our old ones will be here with us as long as earth abides. You may wonder why they had to die, but our old ones will be here with us as long as earth abides.
Niodali ma'arono ni mzeweta gesita nomba al nombak pakat kanol didit zikapiwi odali ma'aron odali ma'aron niodali ma'arono ni mzeweta gesita nomba yo ho yo ho hey yo. Yo ho hey yo Nio dali ma'arono ni mzeweta gesita nomba al nombak pakat kano didit zikapiwi odali ma'aron odali ma'aron Nio dali ma'arono ni mzeweta gesita nomba yo ho yo ho hey yo yo ho hey yo ho hey yo ho hey yo.
Good morning. Welcome to the First Parish in Portland. I am Reverend Elaine Parish-Lua. I am your interim minister, and we welcome everyone online as well as those present in the parish hall or in the meeting house. First thing I want to do is announce that the COVID team has met. These are now optional. So we invite you, as you are inspired, to wear them or not. And we will try to keep you safe and updated. If anything changes, we may have to put them back on. But for this morning, at least, enjoy breathing. First Parish is a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and our mission here is to nurture the spirit, build community, and help heal the world. Two important announcements. We want to encourage everyone to go to the UUA website, uua.org. There you can find instructions on how to support our fellow in-covenant congregations that have been severely affected by the hurricanes in Florida, and in the southern East Coast. So uua.org, contribute to support those congregations who are flooded and buildings destroyed and some of their members injured. Also want to invite Bill Adams to come forward as he tells you about our newest creative idea for fundraising.
Good morning. Can't talk yet. My name is Bill Adams. Although this morning when I walked into Elaine's office, I got, "Good morning, William." So I kind of knew I was in trouble already, but I haven't figured out what I did wrong. Not sure of my title, but I guess Chief Fundraiser is going to fit right now. How many of you remember the spring fling dinners that John Shaver used to put together for us? Okay. Well, we decided, first of all, since he's out of town, we decided to flip the script and use that idea for a fall fundraiser and call it a fall feast. So I know that many of you are probably disappointed that we're not running another raffle. So let's celebrate community with a bounty of fall feast dinners. In the spirit of getting reconnected, we're looking for 16 First Parish members and friends who are willing to host a fall feast themed dinner at their home. Themes like Italian night, barbecue night, Hawaiian night, whatever your specialty is, or whatever similar to what you did for the spring flings. Please let me know if you're willing to host it by October 16th so we can start sign-ups right away. Please include the theme of your dinner, number of people you can comfortably accommodate in your home, and the date you would like to host a dinner between now and the middle of December. Let's have some fun celebrating the fall harvest together. Once I get the host families lined up, starting next week, I will have sign-up sheets available in the parish hall immediately following the church service, and our church website if I can figure out how to use Sign Up Genius. Dinners will be the same as before, $35 a person, and the good news here is that based on my announcement that was in the church bulletin, I've already got 11 hosts signed up. So Austin and Elaine Farah, Alan and Alyssa Armstrong, Chris and Lynn Beasley, Ted and Sally Oldham, Linda Sherry and Jeff Logan, Leslie Runser and Tom Rogers, Jeff and Sue Cook, the staff, Sue and Vinnie Valagor, Janet Puiston and Richard Wolf, and Kathy Vazina. So I only need 5 more. So let me know. I'll be out in the parish hall after the service. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Each week, yes, Sue Cook also has an announcement.
So, good morning and greetings from the Ministerial Search Committee. I'm Sue Cook and I'm chair of the committee.
Did you say that mystery part on purpose?
Ministerial Search Committee?
It has been a ministerial committee, so we're so glad that you're here to announce this.
Well, I guess that's an example of how we're often running, that I'm just talking too fast. I'll slow down. I am chair of the Ministerial Search Committee, and with the guidance and support of our experienced interim minister, Reverend Elaine, and a thorough process outlined by the UUA, the search committee is actively working on preparing materials about First Parish and our community to share with ministerial candidates. These materials include facts and figures such as First Parish history and the number of members in First Parish, as well as who we are as a community and what we are seeking in our next settled minister. To effectively convey the spirit of First Parish to candidates, we need your input about what is important about First Parish and the ministerial functions. How do you live out your spiritual convictions? What keeps you connected to First Parish? What do you want our minister to focus on? What does the future of First Parish look like to you? The search committee urges you to complete the congregational survey to help us build our story about First Parish, to inspire and attract the best candidates for our ministerial leadership. A link to the survey is provided in Friday's e-newsletter in the Ministerial Search Committee Update news item. You also will receive a direct email with that link, and if you prefer a paper copy, please call the church office to request one. It's not a short survey. It could take up to half an hour to complete, but I can't stress enough the value of your thoughtful response to the survey and the importance of a robust number of responses for the committee to be able to best describe our church community and hopes for the future. The deadline for responses is October 21. We need to hear from you, so please do not put this off. Thank you.
You all heard her? Merritt's also waving at me. Did you have an announcement too, Merritt?
I wanted you to announce the signatures to the letter to Senator King after the service.
There will be a letter writing table following the service for all of you to send letters, sign letters, and they will be mailed to Senator Angus King, correct? Thank you. Also want you to know that there is a new member visitor conversation today upstairs at the top of the stairs from the Parish Hall, and you can join Lori Hasey, our membership coordinator, who's back from vacation. Welcome back, Lori. If there's anything you would like to learn about First Parish. For those people online, you can find Lori, our membership coordinator, at membership@firstparishportland.org, because we would also like you to feel welcome and to get information about the church as you need. Every week, part of our announcements is our acknowledgement that the land beneath this building, the land beneath the city of Portland, was stewardship by people for thousands and thousands of years before the Europeans arrived here. We acknowledge that part of the founding of this congregation perpetuated the genocide and the atrocities against the sovereignty of those nations that were here. This is Indigenous Peoples Day, so we want to acknowledge that this acknowledgement is not enough for us to restore relationships with the Wabanaki nations, and for us to take responsibility in truth-telling, that amends can be made and relationships can be restored. So today, we actually have Miku Paul and Corey Hinton here with us to represent the people of their nations. Miku Paul is part of the Passamaquoddy Tribe, and she is a multidisciplinary artist, a writer. Her family comes from Kingsclear First Nations in New Brunswick, Canada. We are very glad that she is here. She grew up on the river of the Penobscot and received traditional education from her Wolastoqua grandfather, as well as formal educations from white schools. She holds a BA in Human Development and Communications, as well as an MFA from USM's Stone Coast Graduate Writing course. Miku has been engaged in Indigenous diversity, equity, and inclusion work for many, many decades. We also want to acknowledge the wonderful in-gathering music, and also the postlude music comes from Dawnland singers, who have generously allowed us to use their music during the past 2 years for these services. And our postlude was written by Meg Yates, who's the daughter of Mi'kmaq artist and Colombian fisherman, and the Brooke Brack family of the Dawnland singers created the in-gathering music. Michael Corey Hinton is an attorney with Drummond Woodsum, and which is ranked one of the #1 firms in our nation that practices in the area of Indian law. Corey is a citizen of the Passamaquoddy Tribe, and he lives here in Portland with his wife and 2 children. He has 2 cats and a Great Pyrenees polar bear. He works with nonprofits as well as the firm on tribal-owned enterprises. He counsels and represents tribal nations. He works on economic development issues, nation building, natural resources, and recently he helped enact a law that supports drinking water regulations within his tribe's borders. So we're very glad to have Miku and Corey with us today as we acknowledge our history and build our relationships with the Wabanaki people. Thank you very much, and I hope you... we have another announcement. Please, Chris Minister. This is part of our historic truth-telling for this month.
Mo, it's your turn. Mo is going to turn the light on a big plaque in the back of this meeting house. You may have passed it, and I hope you will look at it today. This plaque honors Stephen Longfellow II. He was Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the poet's grandfather. And this is what the plaque reads. Mo's got the light on it now, and it says, "In memory of Stephen Longfellow, born in the parish of Byfield, town of Newbury, Massachusetts, February 7, 1723, died at Gorham, Maine, May 1, 1790, graduated at Harvard College, 1742. From 1745 to 1760, schoolmaster in Falmouth, clerk of this parish, 23 years, 1750, 1773. First register of probate and clerk of the courts in Cumberland County, 1760 to 1775. He led the youth in learning and his townsmen in public service." Well, imagine the scope of this man's witness. Born a Brit, died an American. He was the first of his family to come to this remote northern region of the colony to live in the rugged fishing and timber settlement called Falmouth and devote himself to community and to church. What the plaque does not say is that Stephen Longfellow II was a co-signer of the 1757 agreement to finance the scouters and the cruisers to hunt and kill Wabanaki. Nor does the plaque mention that his father was supported by an enslaved person. It's interesting, isn't it, that as we acknowledge today a man commemorated as an honored elder of this congregation, we learn that he supported eliminating Wabanaki. Now, please understand that I am not blaming him and his father. Instead, I am deeply, deeply grateful that we at First Parish are owning their stories, and on the same day, we are graced with the presence of 2 of the descendants of those our elders wanted to eliminate. I'm very proud that we are affirming what Theodore Parker, Unitarian minister and abolitionist, preached in 1853. And he said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways, and from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice."
Please give your attention to our prelude.
Bolis Pasmiu, Bolis Scut, Nolwis Miku Paul, Nudabix, Kingsclear First Nation, Skidun Nilwillistaquake. It's a beautiful day. Good morning, everyone. I'd like us to begin with a song you may be familiar with. It's a welcome song. There are many different versions. And I want to ask you if you would mind participate with this as we sing. I'm going to begin the first part of the song, and then we can sing together the refrain, which is to welcome. And it's very simple. It's just Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de. And when we begin that, I'd like to ask, should you feel moved to join me so that we can sing that welcome together. Aliyaha, Aliya Kwanu de, Aliyaha, Aliya Kwanu de, Aliyaha, Aliya Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de. Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de. Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de. One more. Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de, Kwanu de. Anyone? I'm going to read a poem today which is about history and education. And I thought it might be appropriate to share, considering your topics for this gathering. I grew up at Penobscot, you call Old Town, and I went through the school system there. I was the only one in my family that went through the entire school system and graduated high school in the kind of traditional white way. But I often reflect on the education that I received and the ways in which I think public school education in Winooch communities in Maine, whether purposefully or not, tend to perpetuate exclusion of Wabanaki culture and history, and to many times sort of support a status quo of othering. And I understand that Corey's talking about that today as well. So I went to school at Jefferson Street School, a beautiful old brick building with great big windows. It has, over time, it's a historic building, functioned in various ways. I think it was an infirmary, and for many years a grade school, and now I believe is senior housing. It's on the top of a big hill we all call Academy Hill, and it's very much a part of the fabric of Old Town history. Jefferson Street School. I have come here to learn. Kindergarten captive, daily, the unseen line redrawn, chalked skin, a toe dragged in red dust. Repeat after me, Mrs. Lavoie said, her talcum voice a soft drift in my ears. Invader's language spilled from my lips. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I am the constant witness, death, destruction, every chapter an arrival, Spanish, French, English, my own tribe nameless, discarded, the page blank. Bruised, I acknowledge those commemorative gifts. 2 books, black on Sunday, blue on Monday. Worn covers proclaimed reverent use, recitation, praise him from whom all blessings flow. Centuries come and gone. I memorize conquest, recount murderous exploits, tales of that one you call explorer. Columbus, thief of human beings, collector of nations, whose name will never be forgotten, immortal now in stone and story. A myth summoned year after year, the calendar an invocation. No longer a child, I greet this false idol, hand pressed to bronze flesh. Fingers trace polished granite, carved words, language that was never my own, yet all I've ever known. I do this in remembrance. Meus animus in incendia. This soul's measure lost in a chronology of symbols. 5 times 100 beaver moons, all those pieces of earth claimed, flag waving under threat of war, and more war. Lesson number 1. My body, the geography, altered terrain. An echo resounding beneath the brilliant October moon, fading in the morning sun that rises on Columbus Day. Lesson number 2. Memory resides not in my head, but in my veins, more than the mind can describe. A silken web of souls, a drum pulse, a river of blood flooding the continent. Must there always be the wraith called suffering, the wolf called war? This river of blood may one day nourish the birth of a new story, a history of peace, the soul of a people.
I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and we will honor our opening words with the hymn 1008. I think the words are printed in your orders of service. It's "When Our Heart is in a Holy Place." Benjamin, would you lead us? When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, you hear us with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each other, every call, and we see our faces in each other's eyes. Our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place. We rise with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place. When we tell the story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's praise. When our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place. We are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place. When we share the silence of sweetest space, hear the call from our hearts stirs within. When we feel the power of each other's faith. When our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place. We are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place. Brenda, would you be our chalice lighter and extinguisher today? And may our hearts be in a holy place as we share these words, which is the lighting of our chalice and covenant. The words are printed in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Tobin, a story for our youngest and our weest, please.
Good morning. My name is Tobin Cooney-Calnan, and I serve as your Director of Faith Formation. Now is the time in the service when I will offer a story. So if there is any young folk, that is children, teenagers, anybody young at heart who'd like to come up and share a story with me, I invite you to do so now. And you can come on up if you are there, as you feel comfortable. And if you are a young person at heart, you can, but maybe like more my age and body, you can stay in your own seat. That's also good. So the story that I'm going to share with you today is about fry bread. How many of you are familiar with fry bread? Oh, so quite a few of you. That's awesome. I didn't know too much about it. It's a Navajo, really, tradition. So I'm going to read you a little bit from the author's note about fry bread. The story of fry bread is the story of American Indians, embracing community and culture in the face of opposition. It is commonly believed that the Navajo were the first to make fry bread over 150 years ago. The basic ingredients may appear simple: flour, salt, water, and yeast, yet the history behind this community anchor is anything but simple. Despite colonial efforts throughout American history to weaken tribal governments, fracture indigenous communities, and forcibly take ancestral lands, Indian culture has proven resilient. In strange, unfamiliar lands, exiled natives strive to retain those old traditions, and they created new ones, especially for food. Survival meant adapting, and those ancestors, isolated from their familiar meats, fruits, and vegetables, got by with what they had. Without the familiar indigenous crop of corn, historic farming practices and dietary traditions drastically changed. Many tribes faced the origin of modern Indian cooking to this government-caused deprivation. From federal rations of powdered, canned, and other dried government-issued food, fry bread was born. So here is the story of fry bread, a Native American family story written by Kevin Noble Mallard and illustrated by Juana Martinez Neal. Fry bread is food. Flour, salt, water, cornmeal, baking powder, perhaps milk, maybe sugar, all mixed together in a big bowl. Fry bread is shape. Hands mold the dough flat like a pancake, round like a ball, or puffy like Nana's softest pillow. Fry bread is sound. The skillet clangs on the stove, the fire blazes from below. Drop the dough in the skillet, the bubbles sizzle and pop. Fry bread is color. Gold and brown, tan or yellow, deep like coffee, sienna of earth. Like the snow and cream, warm like rays of sun. Fry bread is flavor. See beans or soup, smell taco, cheese, and vegetables, delight in honey and jam. Rise to discover what brings us all together. Fry bread is time. On weekdays and holidays, supper or dinner, powwows and festivals, moments together with family and friends. Fry bread is art. Sculpture, landscape, portrait, our daily craft, shared from teacher to student, a cycle of heritage and fortune. Fry bread is history, the long walk, the stolen land, strangers in our own world. With unknown food, we made new recipes from what we had. Fry bread is place. Alaska, Kansas, all the way to Maine, down to Delaware, on to Georgia, over to Oklahoma, Colorado, and California. Cities and lands we call home. Fry bread is nation. Abenaki, Apache, Arapaho, Onondaga, Sioux, Narragansett, Navajo, Nipmuc, Seminole, Shoshone, hundreds and hundreds of tribes. Fry bread is everything. Round, flat, large, small, north, south, east, west, brown, yellow, black, white, familiar and foreign, old and new, we come together. Fry bread is us. We are still here, elder and young, friend and neighbor. We strengthen each other to learn, change, and survive. Fry bread is you. This is the time where we will now sing I think if we have any children, we're going to go through the arc and come back around, but because I have a cane, I'm just going to go that way. But I'd still like you to make an arc for us, and this is a reminder that we are, in fact, keeping a place for the children. Whether they are here or not, they are in our hearts, and we are hoping and inviting them back in all that we do. And our words are, we will keep a place for you wherever they will go, wherever you may go, and they are in your order of service.
Thank you, Tobin.
Not right now.
We will keep a place for you wherever you may go. We'll sustain this home of faith and love you've come to know. Go in peace, bring hopes to hearts that yearn. We will keep a place for you till you return. Will you breathe with me? In and out. And with your breath, expand the capacity of your heart to be big. Big hearts. Our wise hearts. Big hearts. Our strong hearts. Big hearts can take in truth. And breathe out love. On this Sunday that honors the story of the indigenous people of this land, their beauty, their culture, their wisdom, their presence, long before white people and Europeans arrived. We listen, we learn, we share the intersection of all our lives and all our stories, to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, that together we can restore a new story for the greatest good of all. May it be so. Please join, seated, in singing Spirit of Life. It's number 123 in your hymnals. Corey, please share your words and your wisdom with us. We are so grateful for your presence.
Aguanu Wapanagig, Ndoliwis Corey, Njao, Portland, Nudabegs Zebayag Naga Baluns, Best Gudamagad Nil. Welcome to the Dawnland, the home of the Wabanaki. My name is Corey. I live in Portland, Maine. I'm from the place at the edge of the water in the Francis family, and I'm Passamaquoddy. Thank you for allowing me to introduce myself in my language, Passamaquoddy. We say Best Gudamagadi. The language is challenging, and I'm trying to learn it right now, and so speaking it grounds me and it humbles me, and I find it's a very important way to start a public address, especially in a place such as this. They also say that our ancestors are always listening when we speak our language, and so I speak what limited Passamaquoddy that I have and what I know, because it's always just important to recognize that we're here today because of the sacrifices made by those that came before us, and to try to connect in whatever ways we can to those that gave their lives so we could be here today. The fact that I'm here today in this place in 2022, speaking my language, is a testament to the resilience of my people and my family. I'm extremely grateful to be with you all. Thank you. I know that othering and unothering is a theme that you've all been discussing here, and so I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about what I understand that to mean. It's something that I had never heard of othering or unothering before being asked to be here, and I did a little bit of research for myself and a little bit of learning, and I found that othering and unothering my life has been characterized by it since the moment I came into this place. It's sort of the hallmark of my people's survival in the face of genocide. But as I understand othering, it's a process by which an individual or a group is attributing negative characteristics to others in a way that sets those others apart and casts them as having opposite or different values. It's essentially defining people in a way that puts them at odds with societal norms in another group. And this is my life, being on one side or the other of this. So I think that the best way that I can relate to this and to share my thoughts on the subject is through just telling a story. It's the story of my people and my family and my state, my home here in Maine. For those of you that have heard me speak before, you may have heard me talk about some of these things. I'm a little bit of a broken record, but I find that repetition and coming back to themes in life is extremely important, and it grounds concepts that are bigger than us as individuals. A wise friend told me that power is in perseverance. That's what the story that I'm going to be telling you about is really what it is at its core. It's perseverance in the face of othering. I'm a lawyer. I practice federal Indian law, which involves the representation of tribal nations. It's the complex field. It's a field that's a complex result of several centuries of federal laws, including Supreme Court precedents that are steeped in horribly racist themes that date back well over 1,000 years to the Roman Empire. Federal Indian law is the core of United States constitutional law. It's the core of American property law. At the core of American property law, which is all of Western property law, there are directives from the Pope, directives pursuant to which Christian crusaders and then European monarch states were directed to conquer in the name of God whatever lands and resources they found that were not controlled by their God, whatever resources were not controlled essentially by Christian people. This doctrine of discovery was a basis for the Christian conquest of the Middle East, of Africa and the Western Hemisphere, and for the subjugation of indigenous inhabitants that were encountered by Europeans in all of these places. At its core, the teachings of the Catholic Church with respect to non-Christian peoples were the most prominent existence of othering in human existence. I would truly love to see a greater existence of othering, but I honestly couldn't come up with one. I thought, what are seismic, earth-spanning institutions that have the power to set the course of history? And very few have been around to the extent of the Catholic Church. And so the doctrine of discovery, I think, represents a Christian policy aimed at perpetuating othering throughout the world in the name of the Christian kingdom. By the 1500s, all Western European nations were colonizing in the name of God. Whatever lands and resources they could find that were not controlled by Christian people. Here, however, in Turtle Island, in Wapanag, we already had laws and inherent policy mechanisms to govern ourselves, to conduct diplomacy among different peoples and communities, and to share our resources. Prior to contact, the dish with one spoon treaties among the Wabanaki, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, they were used to provide for the sharing of hunting and fishing grounds, lanes of commerce, and even places where foods were grown and harvested. After contact with Europeans, the Wabanaki nations in particular sought to draw a careful line between themselves and the European nations whose numbers were growing on our shores every single day. In Passamaquoddy and in Maliseet, Wolastoqey, the word that we use to describe these agreements is Lagadawagan. It generally means treaty today, but in our language, it more precisely refers to kinship and the renewing of familial bonds. Treaty, the English word, derives from a Latin word, tractatus, which means the handling, drawing, or managing of something, the bargaining of something. Just in how these divergent peoples, the indigenous peoples and the European peoples, understood fundamentally what they were doing, it was on the one hand, from our perspective, grounded in an embrace and in the creation and the building of something that was more than just a contract. But in the Latin sense, it was very much about bargaining and putting something in a place, grounded in more of a sense of property ownership. But regardless of our different understandings of what we were doing, we made many of these treaties, these covenants. They were indicated through wampum belts, through covenant chains, which were all metaphors for how we each held the opposite ends of our duties in this relationship. There were many treaties made here between the Wabanaki and in this part of what's now the United States and this continent, with the British in particular. The British were brutal. The decision for us down this way, after several hundred years of dealing with the British, when the Americans decided, we're going to declare independence, I think it was pretty easy for us to say, I think we'll go with these Americans. They seem maybe a little bit nicer, or at least they use nicer words in describing their relationships with one another. Let's talk about the Declaration of Independence, though. The words that the Americans used, they sounded really good, right? That line from the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That's the one that I think stands out for most of us. It's one of the most romanticized pieces of prose that's ever been written in this country, but it's just a poetic facade. All it did was mask the true beliefs of the slave owners that wrote those words. The majority of the signers of the Declaration of Independence quite literally owned human beings as personal property at the time that they wrote those words. Were all men truly equal in the eyes of the Founding Fathers? No. They had been engaged in subconscious othering since the moment that they were born into a Western world whose concepts are built on property and value and capitalization. After all, just 21 years before the Declaration of Independence, the Fifth Proclamation of 1755 was signed, apparently by Mr. Wadsworth, which I just want to say, shocking to hear that one of the gentlemen who was a historical pillar of this institution signed something that offered a bounty for the capture and the killing of my people in what is now southern Maine. I don't like to speak in hyperboles, but it seems obvious that the phrase, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, was a bunch of crap. It didn't apply to non-white people. It didn't apply to white women. It didn't apply to non-Christians. It did not apply to Native Americans, certainly. It certainly wouldn't have applied to Africans, given the fact that many of the same people who wrote the Declaration of Independence were a part of the framing of the Constitution, which, at its ratification, counted only 3 out of every 5 African slaves as people for purposes of determining representation in Congress. The core of this country, from its declaration to its organic document, was structured around the institutional othering of people with perceived differences. But going back to 1776, July 1776, when the Declaration was being signed, literally, just up the road in Watertown, Massachusetts, the United States' first treaty was being negotiated. It was being signed by representatives of the Passamaquoddy, the Mi'kmaq, and the Wolastoqey nations. And it was signed on July 19, 1776, just 2 weeks after the Declaration of Independence. A few months later, General George Washington wrote to the Passamaquoddy chiefs. We have a letter, actually, that's been safeguarded through many, many years. It's now definitely in the records of Congress. But it was a letter that was written and delivered from George Washington to the Passamaquoddies, actually on Christmas Eve, 1776, in which he implored the Passamaquoddy chiefs to deliver the warriors that they promised in that Treaty of Watertown. That Treaty of Watertown was a treaty of friendship and peace. There were no explicit reservations of lands. That Treaty of Watertown was born out of our true understanding of Lagadawagan, of peace and friendship and family. We committed our warriors to go and serve under the Americans to fight for your ideals. We thought that those were ideals that were truly shared with us, that the sort of unothering had already occurred with respect to the natives and the Americans when we signed the Lagadawagan. Our warriors fought proudly in the American Revolution. We tell stories of, in what's now Machias, how our warriors took down British schooners that were coming across the bay, our bay, Passamaquoddy Bay, to land in what's now Machias, to take over the town and install British officers as the overlords. We tell stories of Passamaquoddy bravery, taking down with a single shot the officer in the front of that boat, taking that boat, sailing it up the river, and delivering it to George Washington's colonels, and saying, "This is us playing our part as a part of your war for independence." After the Revolution, Congress enacted the Non-Intercourse Act, which was supposed to render void treaties that were made to take away lands from tribal nations, unless those agreements were made by the approval of the United States. But despite this, and despite our treaties with the Americans, the federal government did not protect us following the American Revolution. In 1794, the Passamaquoddy, we relinquished all but 23,000 acres of our Aboriginal territory in what was then the colony of Massachusetts. Subsequent sales and takings by Maine reduced its territory to under 15,000. But this treaty, like others entered into between the Wabanaki nations and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and then the state of Maine, they all failed to comply with one of those first acts of Congress, the Non-Intercourse Act. 30 years later, Maine's original constitution was enacted with a provision required by Massachusetts and approved by Congress that required the state of Maine to uphold the treaties that had been entered into between the Commonwealth and the tribal nations. Thus, we were told upon Maine's entrance to the Union that our treaty rights, our Lagadawagan, would be upheld by Maine. But we were dismayed to see Maine just simply install itself as yet another colonial overlord to whom Wabanaki lands and resources were nothing but opportunities to create material wealth. Whether through the theft of the Penobscot Nation's treaty-reserved townships or the flooding of Wendakemiguk Indian Township to power lumber mills, the Wabanaki treaty rights referenced in Maine's Constitution have never been properly respected. These words are still literally a part of Maine's Constitution, yet Maine passed a law just to omit them from printing, as though our treaties have no power. But the actual omission from printing acknowledges that they are still in force and effect. This is how Maine has treated us. Our bountiful natural resources on land and water, in the salt water and the fresh water that sustained us, they simply became the capital investments to drive intergenerational wealth. And the transfer of our resources to these non-native lumber towns saw us spiral into destitute poverty while people around us became rich off of that which once sustained us. The state of Maine has always fancied itself as an independent, sort of cheeky little bit of New England rebelliousness. But one area where Maine has been particularly independent has been with respect to national policy and legal norms regarding indigenous rights. The U.S. Constitution gave Congress power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, among the states and with Indian tribes. In the early 1820s and 30s, the U.S. Supreme Court, through the father of American jurisprudence, Chief Justice John Marshall, wrote a number of opinions called the Marshall Trilogy. These decisions recognized that indigenous nations were endowed with inherent sovereignty to govern themselves and their lands to the exclusion of the states and under the protection of the United States. The last of these decisions, Worcester v. Georgia, was intended to protect the Cherokee from the incursions of the state of Georgia, which had literally passed laws to regulate conduct on Cherokee-reserved treaty lands. President Andrew Jackson is said to have infamously said, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." And the trail of tears followed. Maine has treated its indigenous people like Andrew Jackson treated the Cherokee, leading up to the Trail of Tears. In 1842, the brightest legal minds in Maine that sat in Maine's law court wrote a decision in Murch v. Tomer. They said, "Imbecility on the part of the natives and the dictates of humanity on ours have necessarily prescribed to them their subjection to our paternal control in disregard of at least some abstract principles of the right of man." In 1892, Maine's most brilliant legal minds once again wrote a decision in State v. Newell, which imparted a different sort of racial-infused legal precedent, this one aimed at the systematic erasure of an entire people. In Newell, the court decided that the Passamaquoddy tribe legally did not exist. It said that the Passamaquoddy and the tribes here in Maine were not like the tribes of the West. We could not make war or peace or even administer civil justice among ourselves. These decisions threw open the door to the trampling of our property rights, to the state-sponsored takings of our tribal territories, to the flooding of our lands to power your homes and your paper mills. We have never forgotten these grave injustices that were all the result of othering. Maine sought to erase our people from existence. We suffered greatly. The Maine Indian Claims Settlement Act was supposed to change that for us. But it never really did. The pain of those years leading up to 1980, it persists. A little personal story about me and my family and why I engage in the work that I do, which I think is, to some extent, unothering. On November 14th, 1965, 5 white hunters from out of state killed B.L. Ballunz, Peter Francis, my great-grandfather, who was a Passamaquoddy elder and a World War II veteran. The men came to my community, Zabayek, the place at the edge of the water, looking for girls. According to witnesses, they offered money and alcohol in exchange to young women, in exchange for access to young women, most, if not all of whom, were young and at school age. Peter, his brother George, and his brother-in-law Christy sought to distract the men and to protect the young women from the aggressive overtures of the hunters. But the hunters' thirst for deviancy soon turned violent. Within hours of their arrival in my community, the hunters mortally wounded Peter. They had severely beaten Christy and his 8-year-old son, Kirk. As they sped off, Peter lay in a pool of his own blood, having suffered a fatal blow by a 2x4 that one of the hunters had picked up off a nearby scrap pile. Peter died the next day. Christy and Kirk were left with psychological scars from which they would never heal. My great-grandfather survived the torpedoing of his ship in World War II. He survived a late winter storm that left him stranded in the woods for months. He survived things that no men should have survived. Yet he stood no chance against 5 young men from Massachusetts whose sense of entitlement towards indigenous women turned murderous. The sick ideations of these men are no surprise given the fascination of Americans and European societies with hypersexualized portrayals of indigenous women as a result of othering. As a result of this concept upon which we are different, that our men and our women are to be romanticized and are objects of your fascination. American culture is rife with reliance on the age-old racist stereotypes of Native American men as noble savages and of Native American women as squaws in need of rescuing, like Captain John Smith so infamously saved Pocahontas. These images and their underlying racist tropes have become ingrained in America's collective memory, and they live in the subconscious of so many of us who have seen the fictional account of the holiday now known as Thanksgiving, or the holiday formerly known as Columbus Day. These fictionalized accounts of real events gloss over the acts of violence and oppression that occurred in real time in furtherance of the systematic oppression of people who were perceived as different. The murder of Peter Francis was another symptom of the societal problem, which still stands as an obstacle to racial equity in this country. About 10 years ago, I was sitting with my great-uncle, B.L., who was the son of my great-grandfather who was murdered. After recounting the story of his father, and he was terminally ill at the time, he was asked to just sort of reflect on his life as it was sort of expiring, sadly. He broke down in tears. And this is a guy who I just cherished my whole life. Anyone who spent time at Zabayek over the years knew B.L. He liked New York Giants football because he was rooting for football before there were Patriots. He loved the Red Sox. He loved NASCAR, drinking Marlboro Reds and drinking Budweisers. He was like the coolest guy ever. But he broke down in tears in front of me that day, and we all broke down in tears together as he said, "There's never been justice for Native people. There was no justice for us then when they killed my father and let his killers go free. There's been no justice since then. There's no justice now, and there never will be justice. Stories like this are common in our communities, in many communities of color. This feeling of helplessness and of apathy is more common than not. As depressing as it was to hear, this was a galvanizing moment in my life. Reflecting on that, I realized that my great uncle, he had experienced othering to such a degree that it had broken down and stripped him of his will to fight for justice, for his own father. I see that now. I didn't know what othering was then. I didn't know what unothering was then. But I knew from that moment in my gut that from that point forward, what needed to be done was to fight for justice for our people, to fight for those who have been historically and systematically oppressed, to fight for a place where our children grow up, live their whole lives, and then die feeling like they were different and not good enough because of what somebody else said to them. Today, Maine is a picture perfect of othering. Black people comprise 1% of Maine's population, yet they account for 5% of all arrests, including 21% of all Class A drug arrests and 15% of all Class B drug arrests. While black people comprise 1% of the state's population, they are 12% of prison sentences in all of Maine. In Maine, the 4 federally recognized tribal nations in this state are categorically barred from accessing the same laws and benefits as other tribal nations elsewhere in the United States. You want to see othering and systematic racism, folks? Look no further than the Pine Tree State. Folks may come here for rocky coastlines, our blueberries, and our lobster, but what you're going to get is a whitewashed culture where racial issues are constantly pushed to the side to make sure they don't negatively affect America's and a tourist's perception of what Maine should be, a squeaky white place where there are more moose than people of color. We're still here, though. In Augusta, leaders like Rachel Talbot Ross, Penobscot Ambassador Molly Ann Dana, they're making noise and they're fighting to ensure that racial equity issues do not fade from Mainers' collective consciousness. In Washington, D.C., our champion, Jared Golden, is doing just the same, having introduced legislation to help our people access federal laws passed by Congress for the benefit of tribal communities. This is what racial equity and unothering requires: taking a stand, having hard, uncomfortable conversations, and then making bold choices aimed at lifting people up, giving a hand up, not a hand out. Not incremental bites at the apple that always seem to leave real progress just beyond reach. We are here for real change, but we can only do it together. That's why I would like to close by urging everyone here to please stand up with the Wabanaki Nations in our efforts to transform tribal-state relations, to help fight for environmental justice and racial equity, for Maine's First People, for Maine's people as a whole, and to make a better community for all of us. Thank you very much, Gachewaliwan, for having me today.
Thank you, Corey. The principle of unothering is that none of us are free until we are all free. I invite you to rise in body or spirit, and we will sing, "Love Will Guide Us" as we move through these new waters. Please. It's number 131 in the Great Hymnal. Now I invite Una Voce to come forward as they sing for us breaths, and we receive your offering. Your offering goes for the work of unothering, for our history innovation, to tell the truth of this 350-year-old institution, to move us forward into new relationships, new truths, new understandings. So please, be generous.
Listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters. Those who have died have never, never left. The dead are not under the earth. They are in the rustling trees. They are in the groaning woods. They are in the crying grass. They are in the morning rocks. The dead are not under the earth. So listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters. Those who have died have never, never left. The dead have all packed with the living. They are in the woman's breast. They are in the wailing child. They are with us in our homes. They are with us in this ground. The dead have all packed with the living. So listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters. Listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath. 'Tis the voice of the waters.
Thank you, McHugh. Thank you, Corey, for bringing your wisdom, your stories to us. The ancestors inside this space hear you. We hear you. We see you. Thank you. Thank you, Devin, for your technical support. Thank you, Brenda and Wabanaki Ally team, for your support of today's service. and to Chris Minister and to Jennifer Caswell for last Sunday's and this Sunday's narrations of our history. May we continue to tell truths that will heal and inform. And we remember again these words of Theodore Parker. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is long. May our eyes reach in little ways to truth. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by my experience of sight, but I can divine by conscience. I am sure the arc bends towards justice. Please join with me in the unison benediction that's printed in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And I invite you to enjoy the recorded music of Meg Yates, I Welcome Joy into My Heart.
I welcome joy into my heart. My heart is full of joy. I welcome joy into my heart. My heart is a heart of joy. I welcome joy into my heart. My heart is full of joy. I welcome joy into my heart. My heart is a heart of joy. I welcome love into my heart. My heart is full of love. I welcome love into my heart. My heart is a heart of love. I welcome love into my heart. My heart is full of love. I welcome love into my heart. My heart is a heart of love. I welcome change into my heart. My heart is full of change. I welcome change into my heart. My heart is a heart of change. I welcome change into my heart. My heart is full of change. I welcome change into my heart. My heart is a heart of change. I welcome grace into my heart. My heart is full of grace. I welcome grace into my heart. My heart is a heart of grace. I welcome grace into my heart. My heart is full of grace. I welcome grace into my heart. My heart is a heart of grace. My heart is a heart of change. My heart is a heart of love. My heart is a heart of joy. My heart is a heart of joy. My heart is a heart of joy.
Please be sure to enjoy coffee and sign your letters to Senator Angus.